Hi, folks. Spike here. Mark Plummer is one of nature's scholars, a master of collecting, keeping, and curating many documents related to all things Scientological. So, when he finally came to talk with Jon, I was not surprised that their talk lasted for 3 hours. It's all great stuff, but in the name of my sanity and your patience, we will be splitting this marathon interview into 3 segments. In this first segment, Jon and Mark talk about Mark's early days in Scientology, his entrance into the Sea Org, and his eventual exit and first days protesting against Scientology abuses. Enjoy! There's lots more to come.
I'm John Atack, and that could change at any minute. And finally, after all of these years of knowing each other at long distance, we meet, and
Right.
I'm absolutely delighted. This is the incredible Mark Plummer.
Well, thank you. And a pleasure to meet you. Really glad to be doing this.
Great.
God, I've heard of you forever.
Well, likewise, and we
uh,
skulked around with the same people, but
yeah.
somehow our paths didn't cross, apart from a few emails here and there. So let's get into how you got involved with Scientology, and fill in as many details as you want, because I'm fascinated to understand.
Okay. Well, okay. I got involved in 1974 in March.
A few months before me.
There was at that time, and I could be wrong. Okay, I'm going totally off my memory. I don't have notes.
Yeah.
But there was a Clear America crusade running. Because I can remember going to an event at some dumpy old auditorium, long forgot the name of it, but here in Austin, Texas, where I live. And it was really weird to me because there were all these men standing around, and women too, in paramilitary uniforms.
Yeah, that scared me as well.
Officers, with the gold beret and whatnot.
All the little campaign medals as well, come on.
Exactly. I didn't even know anything about Scientology. Someone just said, "Come on, let's go." It was a woman. And I kind of had the hots for her. So,
well, there you go. How are you going to resist?
Yeah. The honeypot, like the love bombing type of thing. But there was no relationship there, and there never was going to be. I found out later she was married, for crying out loud. So that wouldn't have ever gone anywhere with us. But I was hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're a young man, you're hopeful. What can I say?
And this is for you, Alan Stanfield. This is the old man talking about his sex life again. Fuck you. Anyway, I'm sorry. Couldn't help that. But I have a detractor.
Yes, and, we all have one or two.
He's not a nice man. So there you go, Alan. I know you're going to be watching this because you always like to twist things around. Fine. I don't care. You mean nothing to me. So, there I was at this event, and the band was called SEA, a 4-piece band. Don Van Vleck, his wife Portia Van Vleck. Let me see, she was a course supervisor at Austin Foundation. CC Free, and the drummer Bob Sullivan. Okay. Well, they were doing the music for the event. And one thing that was really odd to me was here you have Scientology and the Sea Org event, and yet they were playing songs like Leave Your Body Behind by the 13th Floor Elevators, which is a local legendary psychedelic rock band here in Texas.
Yeah.
And with Rocky Erickson. I've known him, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I've known him since 1967. They were widely regarded as the very first ever psychedelic rock band in history, before the Great Dead even.
Wow.
So it was kind of weird to see these Sea Org members, in the band doing song by this druggy band. And they definitely, the Elevators were druggies. They were like big
Hard
proponents.
to be a psychedelic band without taking some drugs.
LSD and psilocybin, mescaline, you name it. You know, they did it all.
Yeah.
I didn't, but you know, they did. Anyway, so that was strange. I was feeling relieved to like get out of there. I felt like I escaped because they had all the officers posted by the door as if they were guarding the door. Yeah. And I actually ended up creating a diversion so I could slip out of there because they were doing their crush-regging and signing people up. No way I was ready for that. No. So I did then start a relationship with a woman who I had known for a few years because I had hired her to work in the restaurant that I managed while I was going to the University of Texas.
Okay.
And at one point she had quit and gone off, and I hadn't seen her for quite a while until one day I was bicycling to class at UT, and there she was, and I like zoomed over on my bike to chat her up, and she looked so much better than I had known her before. Like when I knew her before, she was this apathetic, skinny little girl, weighed 95 pounds, 5'6", very downtrodden looking and kind of a depressed person that didn't have much of a life, didn't have much going on. And when I bumped into her, she seemed to have like brightened up and was holding her head up and seemed happy. And she put on about 25 pounds. She looked like a healthy, normal weight now. And I asked her, wow, you've changed. You look great. What's up? What have you been up to, you know? And she said, well, I'm in Scientology now. And I thought, well, maybe there really is something to this, because the word on the street around the University of Texas and, you know, was stay away from Scientology. It's a cult.
Yeah.
And I always did. I would see their body routers all the time because the org was about 4 blocks north of UT campus and 4 blocks west during that time period. So they were always on around campus because there's constantly a pool of fresh meat there coming in, you know, every semester. You got all these new kids enrolling, you know,
and you're most vulnerable when you were in that freshman year at college. You're gonna be more open than at any other time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was, so I bumped into this lady, Kathy was her name, and she convinced me to come in and try Scientology, to do a communication, the HAS,
Hubbard Apprentice Scientologist. Yes.
Right. And I did. And around that time, we also started having a relationship, a romantic relationship. And a couple of things happened. After about 3 weeks, we decided, one, we weren't right for each other. Just the relationship wasn't really what either of us wanted. And a part of that was she was getting into trouble with ethics at the org because she had slept in a time or two and didn't show up on post. And I was looked at like a potential trouble source because I was a bad influence on her. Right?
Keeping her up late at night. Yeah.
I think we even smoked pot a time or two. I'm not sure, but I know I was during that time period. And it was funny because I had a run-in on the comm course where the supervisor said to me, you can't smoke pot while you're, you know, a student. And my attitude was like, I'll do whatever the hell I want to. I paid for the course. It's my life. I want to smoke pot. I'm going to do it. You know,
self-determinism not permitted.
That didn't work too well. So anyway, I finished the comm course, but I was so unimpressed by it. It didn't stick. It didn't do anything for me. And I can remember being announced in reception of the Austin Org there. The AG, Danny Chadwell, his wife, Cindy, was the ED. My first senior in Scientology, Rick DeWitt. They're all like, hey, hip, hip, hooray, you know, and all this. And like, okay, Mark, your next step is the HQS, Hubbard Qualified. And I'm like, bye. And I turned and literally walked right out the front door of the org, you know, as if to say, you know, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm done, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, that was the end of the relationship with Kathy, because it was obvious I was some kind of disaffected dude that, you know, I wasn't going to be a Scientologist. And that was a condition of her continuing to have a relationship with me, was I had to continue on with Scientology. All right. So I went on with my life and didn't even think. Now, what was going on with me at that time? I was a busy man. I worked 40 to 50 hours every week managing the restaurant. I carried 12 to 15 semester hours at UT, where I was working on a biology degree. And I was singer in a band, a gigging, you know, rock and roll band, a cover band. I always doing something, never a dull moment for me.
No.
Okay. And then what happened next thing, I remember Sunday I was at home and the phone rang and it was Kathy, the girl I'd had the relationship with. And she's like, I'm pregnant. Oops. Okay. God, I was 22, going on 23, roughly 74. I probably had turned 23 by that point. And wasn't ready to be a father.
No.
Long story short, I ended up going to her later and convincing her to let's try to make this relationship work for the kids' benefit. I became a father in December of 74, like 9 months after I'd broken up with Kathy. There was, she was having a kid. And when I saw my son, there was just no way I was not going to be a part of his life. Okay. I started feeling guilty. She wasn't even asking me to be a part of her life. She wasn't even asking for child support or anything. But it was me who saw my son and felt like, oh God, you know, I got to have this guy in my life. And so I convinced her to let's see if we could make the relationship work, knowing that I would then have to try to see if Scientology would work for me. Okay, so in a sense, I, you know, in retrospect, I look back now and I fucked up big time. I sold out in that respect.
Yep.
I didn't realize what I was getting into.
No.
But, you know, I mean, I didn't know the level of commitment and the fanaticism that accompanies all that. You know, I thought, okay, I can join, I can do courses now and then, you know, whatever. Like, no, I mean, immediately there's a big push to become very dedicated, gung ho, you know, and do
on
nothing.
Source.
Oh yeah,
on Source. Yeah.
So back then they had a weekly contract in addition to offering 2.5 and 5 year contracts. They had at the Austin org anyway, a weekly contract. And I ended up signing one of those because they would never give me an answer about how much is the weekly pay. How much am I gonna? And I'm a new dad. I got to make some money, and I got to know how much and plan. You know, never could get an answer. So I signed a weekly contract, week to week. I think it was verbal even. I don't think it was actually a written contract. But first week, $7 for a full week of work. And I thought, okay, there you go. I'm glad I didn't sign a long-term contract. There's no way I can do this. So I was staff for about a week. Okay. And that didn't work out. And I believed back then, and we're into early 1975 now, that I believed that I wanted to become a trained auditor. I'd gotten the idea that, you know, they're cool people, they help others, they make in the world. But no one in my family would loan me any money And to me, the academy levels were kind of expensive and not really in my budget. Okay. And then a Sea Org recruiter came to Austin from the American St. Hill. Steve Grant recruited me into the Sea Org. And then I had to actually close. By then, my wife, Kathy, the mother of our child, our first child. So we joined the Sea Org and immediately went off to LA. And after the product levels, I was slammed into Treasury. I promised I was going into the TTC, but that never happened.
Which is the technical training core for the uninitiated.
Thank you. I tend to forget. I don't talk Scientologies normally.
No, and then you get back to the subject, and it's all still in there. It's horrifying.
It's like a language, almost like Spanish. I took Spanish in high school for 3 years. I took a year of Latin. I don't speak Latin, but
how sad.
You don't forget it, really, as long as you knew it well to begin with. So yeah, there I was at that show in 1975. I was 24.
And that's in Los Angeles, right?
In Los Angeles, American St. Hill. Excuse me, I got an itch here. In Los Angeles, in Treasury, holding all of Department 8 disbursements. Okay.
Yep.
Now, I guess I was a natural for that because in the restaurant management, I had done a lot of accounting in addition to hiring and firing and training and inventory and payroll and all of that. So they needed someone in Treasury because the predecessor that held the post before me had gone off to Worldwide for finance training.
And Worldwide would have been East Grinstead in
East Grinstead, Sussex. Yeah. I guess it's West Sussex now.
It is West Sussex now. It was just Sussex back in the day. Yeah.
Right. That's my recollection. Because I used to have to send up my 5% payment, out of the ASH show, the American St. Hill Financial Planning every week. 5% went to the Worldwide trustee. And I have to get it in a mail pack. So that was like top priority, getting that money to the GO at Worldwide. Herbie Parkhouse and
Herbie Parkhouse, yeah.
All those guys. Yeah, so Patty, that was her name, Patty Ciparelli, had gone off to Worldwide for finance training. So I took over her position. And, I ended up being in Treasury for 6 years. 75, a little over 6 years, until December 81. A couple of years in, around late 77, we had the List 1 era where missionaries arrived and were meter checking everybody to see if they had rock slams.
And let me just interject that the rock slam is a jagged slapping about of the needle on an e-meter. And Ron Hubbard initially decided that this was a way of finding the rock, which contemporary Scientologists will never have heard of. But in the early 60s, he decided this was the thing that would solve everything. He got something every 6 months that would solve everything. And then he changed his mind about it and decided that this slamming about the needle, the rock slam, meant that you had evil purposes. And so he ordered that throughout Scientology, anybody that had these things would have to, go through an ethics process with Sea Org members, the Rehabilitation Project Force often. And what needs to be added to this is that when Otto Rose went through all of Hubbard's folders in 1971, I think it was, he said he found 200 rock slams. And when he said to Hubbard, "I think you have evil purposes," he was put ashore with his passport and left behind.
Well,
but that Ron Hubbard did, in fact, have evil purposes. The final part of the story is that it was discovered that rock slams were largely caused by the carbon potentiometer, which is the tone arm inside the meter, shedding particles. And I mean, I often saw meters which had no electrodes, no cans plugged in, and they'd be rock slamming. You switched them on because they got this dust floating about them. So a lot of people were accused of having evil purposes who'd actually just got a dirty e-meter. But what can we say?
Well, yeah, to this day, the only tech training, if you will, that I ever had was the HAS course. And then I guess you could consider the PTSSP, routing, handling, and detection, technical, oriented tech course.
How to locate and deal with people who are criticizing Scientology course.
When all this rock slamming garbage was going on, and the missionaires started from the top of the organization board, like the commanding officer or executive director, and the flag banking officer, and the LRH communicator, and the flag representative, and then chief officer and supercargo, and then the div heads. At one point, I'm sitting there tallying up. Okay, the mission had meter checked 11 Sea Org staff at Asheville. 7 of them were found to be List 1 rock slammers. That's 63%.
Yes.
Now, I was not a tech trained guy, but I felt like there's something really wrong here. And naturally, being a dedicated Sea Org member, I pulled out the red balls to see what Hubbard says about rock slams. And so I had this idea that this percentage is way out of whack. We're talking about, SPs. Hubbard said that's your 2.5%.
2.5%. Right?
And so I wrote a letter on the Sea Org number 1, the SO, or Standing Order 1 line, SO 1 line. The line
letters to Ron Hubbard.
To Ron, thinking, and I brought it to his attention, thinking, that maybe he would right this obvious injustice, because my senior, the Treasury Sec, had been RPF'd, Jim Chapman, and there's no way he was a suppressive person to me. That guy was as hardest working guy that you could ever hope to find.
Yeah.
Along with a whole bunch of other staff. I remember having thoughts about, like, well, if the flag banking officer Larry Spencer is an SP, I guess anybody could be, because that's how crazy it was. Like, it didn't indicate to me, in other words, that, but months and months and months went by before I got an answer from Ron. And of course, now I know it wasn't even Ron answering the letters, because I have talked to Janice Gillum Grady, who set me straight, years ago, about how Ron stopped answering his mail before that. And there's an SO unit under Joyce Popham who was actually answering Ron's mail for him.
There was a peculiar moment in, I think, 1982, when Laurel Sullivan, who was L. Ron Hubbard's personal communicator at the time, I think, she put out an issue as an L. Ron Hubbard executive directive saying, of course, Ron Hubbard doesn't answer the letters, and whoever does answer them will henceforth will initial the Ron Hubbard signature to say who you got it from. And I think that issue lasted 1 week before it was withdrawn. I happened to get one of them. One was sent out to me, and I've got an initial L. Ron Hubbard signature. So, and I mean, Hannah Whitfield, when she talked at our Getting Clear conference in 2015, she remembered, because when she was the first ethics officer, the first master at arms in the Sea organization, she got this task of dealing with these things, and she talked about them having boxes full of letters that they just threw overboard and didn't answer.
Wow.
But yeah, a little bit of deception going on there.
No kidding. Well, meanwhile, the RPF was growing and growing and growing, and ultimately there were over 200 Sea Org members on the RPF.
Which is Scientology's gulag, its labor camp.
Oh, yeah. Well, I realized later on that was what was really going on. They needed a workforce to renovate the complex. But so here I was waiting for an answer from Ron, and meanwhile this was going on where people were being RPF'd and the orgs were obliterated. Like half of our staff went to the RPF at least. That's why I became promoted to Treasury Sec. But of course, I continued to hold all of Department 8, which in an American St. Hill is no small task because there's a policy letter in OEC Volume 7 called the Foundation. And it says the day org pays the bills for the foundation work. And that was interpreted to mean that I also did their payroll. So Asho Foundation had about 75 or 80 staff at the time. Asho,
and the foundation is the evening and weekend
right
organization. Then you have the weekday organization, the day org.
Good, some good point to make. Yeah, I assume incorrectly that your audience is only people who know what I'm talking about. And I
Well,
guess
it's probably about 50-50 ex-members and never-ins, as they sometimes call themselves, who are just really curious about us. We're kind of zoological specimens that they're watching.
Good. I'll keep that in mind and try to speak regular English.
Yeah, not Scientology.
Find things as I go. Yeah, so I was meter checked. Actually, in fact, Nancy Manny did my list one.
The legendary Nancy Manny, the excellent Nancy Manny.
One of the missionaries on that mission. I remember that day really well because it was up on the second floor over the Los Angeles organization, LA org, in the complex. And Don Saito, the address officer, came out of the room looking white as a ghost, like Casper the ghost. And I remember thinking, whoop, okay, there goes another one. That was unusual because he, address officer way low down on the org board. And he was the anomaly because the missionary started at the top of the org board and worked their way down. By the time they got to me, I was a division head. So they'd already gone through all the senior execs. We're now at the, division head level. And I got pulled into their session there and asked about a bonus I had received in 1975. And it had come up in session that I was not entitled to this bonus. And it was all of $2.50 we're talking about under flag order 3075 RB or something like that. It's a production bonus where if you're in normal, you get so much, a little pittance of a bonus. And at the time I got that, I was not what they call fully had it. I hadn't been trained on my post of director of disbursements yet. I'd done an instant hat, but I didn't know that my statistic was gross bills paid per policy. That's the statistic for Department 8. My senior had verbally told me that my stat was cash bills spread. So I was operating off of that and collected a bonus based on that. Now, he should have known better. And maybe you could say I should have known better too and not accepted verbal data, if you will. But so I had this withhold created that I had received $2.50 incorrectly, and I had never paid it back to the org. I wasn't entitled to it, right?
You weren't earning enough to, let's face it.
I mean, woohoo! I got $10 base pay and $2.50 1 week in 1975, probably around December of 75. That's what came up, what was checked in the list one session. Apparently, there was some question about whether I had rock slammed, I guess. I don't know. But whatever the case, I was not sent to the RPF. And later on, it was said that the missionaries doing the meter checks were incorrectly interpreting dirty needles as rock slam. I don't even know whether to buy that. I don't think so. Whatever.
Not if Nancy was doing it. I'm sure it was absolutely correct.
I think she probably knew how to read a meter. Maybe.
I think she probably did, yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those mysteries. Now, one really messed up thing about all that time period was we had the List 1 mission there, which I think was a CMO mission, because we staff.
And that's the Commodore's messenger organization,
Right.
the kids who work directly for Hubbard.
Commodore Messenger, right? We who were left behind, and not sent to the rehabilitation project force, were basically told, you guys need to get this particular handling program done, because you failed to spot all these SPs, suppressive people on staff around you. I and a lot of us were subjected to a CMO issue, ED's called the Confront of Evil checklist. I have a copy of that. Pretty rare issue because it was a pilot program. Maybe I should send you a copy of that. But
yeah, let Spike have a copy of it, and we'll make it available to.
I doubt you have it.
Yeah, I don't remember it. And, yeah,
I had to get audited on a rundown called "The Effects of RSers," the effects of rock slammer, to deal with and audit out the effects that these evil people had on me. In other words, it was evaluated that I was supposed to have been at effect of these evil people.
Well, with 63% of ASHO being pretty inevitable, really.
It was that. And I also had to do a leadership course, because now I had become a senior exec when I became Treasury Sec. And well, that was something required of me. And then right after that, I was appointed as Deputy Commanding Officer for ASHO Day. But it's a post I never assumed. I did the whole handling, to get my qualifications up to snuff, but never assumed the post because they never could find a replacement for me in Treasury. Yeah. I was seen to be one who was not the barking, in your face, severe reality adjustment type of exec.
You weren't a good enough bully to be a senior executive in Scientology. How dreadful,
I'm more like a laid back hippie dude that's like, do your job, get on with it, and leave everybody alone,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me interject a little story about the bullying. I worked on the Inwards B&G case in 1984, which is a child custody case. And the mother of the children and the stepfather who were trying to get the children, I offered them a guy to come as a witness, and they both blanched. And this guy could actually testify against the father of the children, who was the Scientologist, and did. And it came out that when the stepfather had been working at the London organization in England, this guy had been his boss, and there was a point where he'd grabbed him by the throat and banged him against a wall. And so that's more the kind of executive quality that they're looking for in Scientology, a bit of physical violence and a great ability to shout loud and derogate people. And you obviously just didn't have the right stuff. What can we say? Lucky you, lucky us.
So many stories. God, I could talk a couple of hours just about violence that I witnessed or was involved in. I never did that on, I'm not a violent kind of person. I don't think. But, oh my God, I've been assaulted by a fellow Sea Org member because at one point an order had come down from the Guardian Office Finance Bureau to withhold federal income taxes from those staff who made over a certain threshold in pay, which generally is your registrars, the salesman.
Yeah, because they take a percentage of everything they sell, 2%. The
bookstore officer. Because they get into a bracket where if you don't withhold it, they could potentially end up owing a lot of money come, time to file. And the Guardian Office didn't want to have that problem with, staff. So I basically was told, yeah, apply the laws of the land or the tax code, if you will. Well, some of the registrars didn't like having money taken out of their pay like that. And one of them was a fellow named Kenny Shapiro, chief registrar at Asho Day, blew up when he received his pay and noticed that there was an amount withheld. And he ran down the hallway into my office and butted me, on both shoulders, knocking me backwards over my desk and screwed up my back. I mean, it hurt. And I called HCO, bring order, and nobody did a damn thing. Why? Oh, he's the chief reg. He makes all this money, and you don't mess with him. He had basically carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wanted. No one would ever discipline him about anything. And I had chronically had issues with him overspending his phone allocation year after year after year, month after month, always spending more than whatever FP, financial planning, had approved. And although I would write job endangerment report, chits, and get cramming orders done on him, it never resulted in any change. And we were opposition terminals, if you will. We were enemies, if there ever were. A couple of Sea Org members that didn't get along. Kenny and I were that, because of me having to do my job and pay all the bills, and his habit of just spending whatever the hell he wanted to make the money. But I understand, okay, but
yeah, the physical assault's another matter altogether, though.
And one person happened to write that up, write a report, and that happened to be, there was a GO missionaire in my office in line to get her pay that night. Now, see, as Asho Day payroll officer held from above, from my Treasury Secretary post, I paid not just Asher Day, but Asher Foundation, which I mentioned, the evening and weekend organization, but I paid Publications Organization US as well, which is now Bridge Publication.
Yeah.
Since 1981, when they reorganized and renamed
the corporate sort out,
PPI, Bridge Publication. So they had about 80 staff that I had to pay too. And I always paid the local GO, the Guardian Office staff, the Assistant Guardian Finance, Assistant Guardian Service Bureau, Assistant Guardian Legal, Public Relations, Intelligence, AG, what they call the AGI, Assistant Guardian for Info or Intelligence. And then later that even got expanded to include all of the GO, the Guardian Office for Greater Los Angeles. I paid all of them. And I even did their financial planning activation, which means I wrote the checks to pay all the PAC, the Pacific Area Command, Guardian Office bills. And later they were renamed GLA, the Greater Los Angeles Area. GO.
I mean, how many people were on that payroll? How many people you?
Oh, you mean just in the GO?
In the GO and at Asho Day, at Asho Foundation?
God, it's been a long time since I added it up. Asho Day had about 105 maybe on average. Asho Foundation about 80, so that's 185. Pubs had about 80, 265. And then GO had another 15, so we're about 280. And then later, the Greater Los Angeles maybe brought that up to around 300 people.
Okay.
That's a lot of payroll vouchers to write by hand every week. It takes a long time. Okay. And I wasn't even able to begin writing those payroll vouchers till generally around 6 o'clock on Friday. Because the financial planning had to be approved first. And then we had to rush to the bank and get the cash from the bank to pay everybody. And then I'd eat something real quick and go back to my office and begin writing because they would line up at my door at around 10:30 to get paid.
Mm.
You know, and there were other things I had to do too, in addition to the pay. When, you know, I mean, there would be tours leaving, and they'd need to get their tour expenses. Maybe they'd, you know, ASHO would send off some guys to New York or San Francisco or Dallas or wherever, you know, on a registration tour, like, you know, basically sign people up and get money, whatever. So I had to disperse that. There was food allocation that I had to disperse to estates to pay for the food. I had to get the check to Worldwide in the mail. That was a priority. The 5% to the trustee Worldwide. So that was basically the first thing that ever got done on a Friday evening.
And that of course would have been the line through to Hubbard himself, that Herbie Parkhouse would be collecting money, and you know, part of that had to be sent to the Swiss bank account that Ron Hubbard admitted to in The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard.
Well, yeah, and later, end of 1977, because we were still in the old ASHO, American St. Hill, on Temple Street. We hadn't moved into the complex yet when the assistant guardian for finance, Gerald McNeely, came into my office one day and said, "Mark, you need to do up the paperwork, what they call a completed staff work, a CSW. That's going to go up to the international board at St. Hill. And the CSW is to open up a second reserve account." Okay. And so this goes up from me to the chief officer, to the commanding officer, to the GO locally in LA, to the US GO, to the Worldwide Finance Bureau, right? Making it look like this is my idea, when in fact it's actually an order come down to me and that I have to comply to send up to the quote international board, as if they ever held board meetings and had board minutes, but they get a CSW from me requesting what they've actually ordered me to do, right? And Jerry said, the reason why I want you to do this is we have so much money in so many bank accounts here in Los Angeles, in California even, that there are no more banks that we can open an account in and be insured by the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation regulation, or the FSLIC, the Savings and Loan Insurance, right? And that was true, because we had accounts in every bank there is. Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Crocker, Security Pacific, you name it, we had an account there. And I was signatory on all of them. Well, I knew, you know, because we had the main account, the book account, the FSM commission account, the service completion award account, the FBO number 1, FBO number 2 account, the American St. Hill Reserve account. And now we're having a new account open up called the Church of Scientology of California American St. Hill Organization Reserve Account number 2. That was the full name of it. Purpose was said because we have so much money here and we're not going to be able to have our funds insured. So therefore, we're going to open an account overseas. And it turned out to be at the Credit Bank in Luxembourg. That was where it was. And I remember the conversation to Jerry, the assistant guardian for finance. And I said, okay, so I'm going to get a bank statement on this account, right? Because I'm thinking ahead about how am I going to, if this account is over there, overseas, and it's kind of a one-way thing, I'm going to cut checks transferring money over there, but I'm not going to be a signatory on that account like I am on all the others. That was like weird. That was a red flag. And I asked, I asked, I said, so how do I know how much to report on the cash on hand statistic if I'm not going to get a bank statement to reconcile? And his answer was, quote, keep a ledger of all the monies that you transfer there and report it on the cash on hand statistic every week at 2 o'clock as if the money is there in the account. As if, I'm thinking, hell, great. You open me up to a charge of falsifying my statistics because I can't actually do a bank reconciliation to know what I'm reporting is true or not. I have no idea if the money's there if I can't see it. That didn't sit right with me. And that was something, one of the things along the way of being in the Sea Org that was frankly began to make me start questioning things. There were others before and after, but that was a big one in my mind.
It fundamentally meant that there was a pool of money that Ron Hubbard had access to.
Oh yeah, well, after getting out of Scientology, and finally I left, later in 1983. But I put it all behind me and didn't even give it much thought until the 90s. One thing that happened in 93 was I heard on the news that Scientology finally got tax exempt status. And that was like, oh, wow. That just bowled me over because I never thought that would happen in a million years. And neither did anybody in Scientology back when I was in.
No, absolutely. And the IRS cases, hundreds of pages of rulings saying how money was going to Ron Hubbard and that this was not therefore a tax exempt possibility.
Blew my mind because you had the Supreme Court of the U.S. in the Hernandez decision, it's known as, in 1989, rule that Scientology was not entitled to tax exempt status for two reasons. One, inurement to Hubbard, and two, the quid pro quo relationship between donations and what they get, of something of tangible value. That's not a donation in the IRS's eyes. So in 93, 4 years later, when the IRS countermanded the Supreme Court's decision, that I couldn't believe it. And I thought they must have just found dirt on the commissioners or something to blackmail them into submission. It's something.
It's really interesting because we've both spent a lot of time trying to understand this. And I interviewed Mike Rinder, who was integral to the process. And he said, I think they just decided that it was costing them too many man hours, that in terms of the job they had to do. The only time I met with the IRS in Reno in 91, when Bill Jordan was doing his stuff there, and this guy was very, very suspicious. He was like, even though I'd written a book about it, it wasn't enough, and eventually he worked out that it was okay. And he said, this is the largest case the IRS has ever had. It's the only case that we've assigned more than 1,000 agents to. And I think in the end, they just got overwhelmed. I too feel that there is some possibility that there was a certain degree of blackmail because that's the way Scientology functions. It scares people.
I hope I'm free to talk about this. I think I am. Over the years, I've been involved in 19 different legal cases involving Scientology, most of them helping, probably at least half of them helping people who were sued by Scientology. And the first one was Arnie Lerma in 1995.
The dear late eccentric Arnie Lerma.
Yeah. I don't even want to go there with him, but it's a really sad story. And I knew him as well as anyone and better than most everyone, because I will say this, it was August 12th, 1995, when I was walking through my kitchen, headed to the back door of my house, when I stopped dead in my tracks because Arnie Lerma was live on CNN headline news. That was the day he was raided, ex parte style. And he was sitting there with his hands, his head in his hands, crushed, like. And it so enraged me what Scientology did to him that I decided that I was going to get a laptop and purchase a dial-up connection to get online and locate Arnie and offer my help in his lawsuit. And I did. By September, we were in regular communication, September 95. But that was 12 years after leaving the Sea Org. And I hadn't, honestly, had hardly ever thought anything about Scientology or whatever. I never went the way of being an indie or a free zoner. I left and that was it. I was done with the whole shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a few months at the middle of the independence in the UK and gradually realized that it was a complete illusion. It was the Wizard of Oz. There was absolutely nothing of value.
Yeah.
Because anything that seemed valuable, you could trace it back to its origin. And as Hubbard said, you got the original source. And anything that was sensible, he'd taken from somewhere else and then usually perverted it in some way, alter ised it, as he put it, because you have to alter is something, enter a lie into something if you want it to persist. And Scientology is just riddled with these little deceptions. But that's another topic which we could probably talk about for hours. Let's wind back to your time at our show.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the credit bank account in Luxembourg. I learned later, much later, in the late 90s, I'd say maybe around 96 or 97 time period, when I was online reading about the IRS case with Scientology. Of course, there was a leak of the closing agreement too back then. At one point, I think the Wall Street Journal published it or something. But it was in something I read along the way that account at the credit bank was a flow account. In other words, I would transfer 10% there generally or more. Like the first transfer I ever did by check was 240,000 from Asho reserve account in LA at the Mitsubishi Bank, where we had that account, overseas to the reserve account number 240,000 at a whack. And then periodically, the idea was you keep the balance down around 40,000 because that's how much we're insured for by the FDIC. But wouldn't want it to grow much over that ever. Anyway, in the IRS case, I read how that account was a flow account because once the money was there, it was transferred to the RRF, the Religious Research Foundation, which I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, was a Liberian corporation. Could be wrong.
I think it was, but if anybody knows better, let us know.
From there, it would inure to Hubbard. So it was just a way to launder money, basically, to Hubbard. Now, I got involved in a case late 90s, early 2000s with Keith Henson. He brought a suit trying to get Scientology's tax-exempt status undone. Didn't go anywhere because the court ruled that he lacked standing because he wasn't a member. And I think that's freaking nuts. Number one, what member is ever going to try to undo Scientology's tax-exempt status? Come on. But that's what happened. But along the way, he came into possession or claimed to have come into possession of a VHS tape of Commissioner Goldberg, then, the one in, at the time Scientology got their tax-exempt status, of him engaged in a sex act with a minor male child. Keith called me on this by phone one night and said, Warrior, what do I do with this? And I said, whoa, I mean, Keith, you better talk to an attorney. Okay? But my gut instinct is that maybe someone trying to set you up, because the mere possession of that tape is a felony.
Yes.
You know, child pornography in the
absolutely.
US. And you don't, like if you're going to turn it into anybody, and you make sure you do it the right way through an attorney. And I don't know whatever happened after that. I never had another conversation with him about that, but I don't think Keith would lie to me. As to whether the tape really showed what he said it does, I don't know, because I never saw it. He could have, I don't think Keith would lie to me. So he could have been opt, if you will, like deceived by someone with OSA trying to set him up. But he did try to undo, and that was one of the cases I worked on along the way, over the years, that lawsuit. I kind of tended to believe maybe there's some truth to it, because I know how Scientology works. Like, if you could do that and set up a commissioner like that and catch him compromised doing something horrible like that, well, of course, you're going to get whatever you want after that.
Yeah.
Because it astounded me that Scientology finally won that war, and that the IRS did 180 reversal after since 1967, when Scientology had their tax exempt status revoked. 26 years later, 26 years, by now, all of a sudden approved. And not only that, but anytime you form a new corporation, it's automatically grandfathered in under this agreement.
Yeah.
And all your existing corporation, they're granted too. It's unprecedented.
And it's a precedent that's not been followed. Various organizations have tried to get exemption on the same basis and been denied it. So
right.
It's a very exclusive case.
Right. I got involved in a case that the tax analyst of the US brought a suit.
Yeah.
Basically just trying to uncover the agreement because it was sealed. And that's unprecedented. No other so-called church or nonprofit corporation ever got that kind of treatment in history of the United States. And they didn't succeed because the IRS and the courts, I guess the courts said, these are working papers, the taxpayer privileged information, and therefore they're not subject to disclosure. What? No. Funky. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
That was another case I was involved in. There was a Jewish couple in LA, the Sklar, SKLAR. And they brought a case against the IRS, claiming that they were discriminated against because they were not allowed to claim their tithes, their donations to the Jewish school or whatever their children attended, whereas Scientologists are allowed to claim their course fees. And that was an interesting case because essentially the courts ruled that to grant you the okay to claim that as a tax exempt, donation would be wrong, because it would be two wrongs. And the thing to do is to undo Scientology's tax exempt status. So the Scars were not allowed to claim their donation as tax exempt. Yeah. In certain cases, I'm not saying all of them, but certain types of donation were not. So that was another case I was involved in. Along the way of being an activist, I met a man named William Greg Haglund from Toronto area. First, we met online because we noticed what each other were posting on Alt Religion Scientology, Usenet group. And we became fans of each other and what we were doing. And Greg's work at that time primarily consisted of picketing the Toronto org. We were to meet, I believe, in 1997 for the first time in person when we went down to Clearwater in December for the annual Lisa McPherson Candlelight Vigil and Protest at Flag. And a couple of things funny happened. The police surrounded him one day early on, like the first day that we were there. Someone had tipped off the police that he was Jerry Armstrong, who was wanted in the U.S. Someone mistakenly, apparently, they identified Greg Hagelin as Jerry.
Well, they're Canadians, all the same, really.
I was with him when the police swarmed him and were questioning him, and all. That was kind of comical. Nothing came of it, of course.
Well, that's it for part 1. Thanks for listening. In part 2, Mark talks about meeting philanthropist Bob Minton, Jon talks about Scientology harassment, and the two continue exploring Mark's amazing path. Join us soon.
Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.